looks like it at the bottom below the number.
Yeah.
Is the last number.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to see so many people that make it here today. We have a very interesting guest, as you can tell. But I have a few logistics to cover first. For those of you who don't live here, the bathrooms are down that hall that way. We do need to ask if people could turn off their cell phones, not necessarily off, but silence your cell phones. The good news is we have a little bit of refreshment after, which will be set up in the ristorante. So after our question and answer period, we'll head on over to the refreshment area. And we think people might have a few questions once they hear this story. So we have cards that we will pass to you. So Robert will be on one side and I'll be on the other. And we'll hand out pens and cards to anybody who has questions. We have a few already. So with that, I'd like to introduce Larry Mabbitt from the Homes. And he is the person that was able to pull this all together and facilitate getting a speaker here. And I'd just like to thank him for that and invite him up to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Sally. First of all, on behalf of myself and many others here at Bretton Woods, I'd like to thank you, Sue Sperger, and Sally Todd, and others that too numerous to mention for their support and leadership. And it is because of that continuing support and leadership that we're able to have events like this one here at Bretton Woods. So our hats off to Sally and to Sue and to several others as well. So first of all, by the time I sat down several weeks ago to write the Bretton Buzz announcement for today's event, by that time I had met Reverend Gleason a couple of times, met with him a couple of times, and gotten to know him a bit. Thanks to the initial introduction, by the way, from Jim and Jen Toonstra, who are here today, I believe. Thank you very much, appreciate that. And as I was writing the announcement, writing the initial intro, which was a rhetorical question, what were you doing 64 years ago? One of the things that I thought about was a speech that was given by Michelle Obama. And in this speech, she mentions conversations that she had had with her mother many years ago. And essentially what she remembered her mother saying to her was, Michelle, don't just complain about it, do something about it. Well, I don't know if Reverend Gleason ever heard that advice in those particular words or not, but I can say that he has certainly acted as if he heard that advice. The things that he did during the 60s and well beyond are examples of somebody who takes that to heart and who has served as a role model for the rest of us in terms of what true public service should be all about. For myself, I'm amazed. I have become amazed at the levels of compassion and commitment and courage that this man displayed all throughout the 60s and well beyond. Serving as an example of what true public service should be all about. So with no further ado, it's my honor to present to you the Reverend Richard Gleason.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming today. It's wonderful being here with people of faith. He mentioned public service. I don't consider anything I've done public service. I feel and believe with all my heart that everything I do, I try to do it for the Lord, what Jesus would have me do. Recently, I was introduced as having been a person of history. And after the program, a little boy came up to me and said, "Sir, if you're part of history, why aren't you dead?" Well, let me tell you, I am here and I am alive by the grace of God. Before I get into my personal story, let's look at a clip from public television, the Freedom Rides, and see what the Freedom Rides were all about back in 1961.
I'm a senior at American Baptist Theological Seminary and hope to graduate in June. I know that an education is important, and I hope to get one. But at this time, human dignity is the most important thing in my life, that justice and freedom might come to the Deep South.
I have no doubt that the Negro basically knows that the best friend he's ever had in the world is a Southern white man.
We talk about it here as separation of the races. Customs and traditions that have been built up over the last 100 years that have proved for the best interests of both the colored and the white people. There's not been one single change.
The colored man knows where he stands. The white man knows where he stands. We have signs saying colored and white. The colored man knows that he is not to enter there.
Well, a nigger's all right in his place, but they've always been behind us, and just tell you the truth, I want them always to stay behind me, because I never have loved a nigger, mister.
You cannot change a way of life overnight. The more they try to force us into doing something, then the worse the reaction will be.
Our colored people will do exactly as they've done. Our white people will do exactly as they've done. Why? Because it's worked out best.
It was all-encompassing, this so-called Southern way of life. Would not allow for any breaks. It was a system that was only as strong, the white Southerners thought, as its weakest link. So you couldn't allow people even to sit together on the front of a bus, something that really shouldn't have threatened anyone, but it did.
Boarding that Greyhound bus to travel through the heart of the Deep South, I felt good. I felt happy. I felt liberated. I was like a soldier in a nonviolent army. I was ready.
I'm on my way.
I'm sorry, our management does not allow us to serve niggers in here.
The Freedom Rides of 1961 were a simple but daring plan to put blacks and whites on commercial buses. They would deliberately violate the segregation laws.
These people are going from town to town and getting off the bus, Negro men and white women, to provoke acts of violence.
The idea of going into Mississippi and going into Alabama and challenging segregation so frontally is something that alarmed not only those who oppose civil rights, but those within the civil rights community.
I don't question their legal right to travel, but I question their wisdom. Some people can get hurt.
How was that feeling? I'd just like to punch some of them damn agitators right in the face.
There was a mob, looked like 1,000 people. They had these iron pipes.
They were screaming, kill them niggas, and they had babies in their arms.
I asked God to be with me, to give me the strength I would need to remain nonviolent and to forgive them.
We'll take hitting, we'll take beating. We're willing to accept death. But we're going to keep coming until we can rise.
Finally, on September 22nd, After hundreds of arrests, the ICC issued its order. It gave the Freedom Riders what they've been asking for. The colored only, the whites only signs that had been in the bus and rail stations for generations, they finally came down. It was America. It was interracial. It was interregional. It was secular and religious. It brought together people of different political philosophies. There was a sense of unity and purpose that I'm not sure that the movement ever had before. It was a shining moment.
Hallelujah, I'm traveling. Hallelujah, ain't it fine? Hallelujah, I'm traveling down freedom's main line.
December 5th, 1960, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation by race in any public transportation was unconstitutional. And then in 1961, May of 1961, 7 blacks, 6 whites boarded 2 buses in Washington, D.C. to challenge the South's failure to end segregation. And before they left the city, the FBI's paid informant, Gary Thomas Moore Jr., notified his supervisors in Washington of a plot to block the Freedom Riders, to stop the Freedom Riders. And 1, the police would not be at the bus terminals when they arrived for protection. And 2, the Klan would have 15 minutes to work over the Freedom Riders. And 3, a single gunshot by the police would signal for the Klan to back off. And 4, there'd be no arrest. And on Mother's Day Sunday, on the outskirts of Anniston, Alabama, a mob of 50 Klansmen ambushed the first bus. After slashing the tires, smashing a window, throwing in a firebomb, they tried to burn the Freedom Riders alive by holding the doors of the bus closed. And when the gas tank exploded, someone yelled, "It's going up," and the mob backed off. And the Freedom Riders, choking from the thick black smoke that had filled the bus, stood up and pushed open the doors of the bus. And as they tumbled to the ground, they were beaten with iron pipes, clubs, baseball bats, and bicycle chains. They were taken to the hospital. The hospital, afraid of the mob, refused to give them treatment and ordered them to leave. When the second bus of Freedom Riders arrived in Birmingham, 1 hour later, there was no police in sight. And as they entered into the bus terminal, they were beaten by a mob. Let's take a closer look. The man in the foreground with back to camera is the FBI's paid informant, Gary Thomas Road Jr. He is pinning a Freedom Rider to the floor so the man holding the iron pipe can crack him in the head. Jim Peck, Harvard graduate and Freedom Rider, was cracked in the head with an iron pipe, knocked unconscious. His head was split down to the skull, and it took more than an hour to find an ambulance willing to take him to the hospital. And when they got him to the hospital staff refused treatment. He was taken to the second hospital, and there his skull was closed with 53 stitches. The Bergmans, 60-year-old Dr. Walter Bergman, the oldest freedom rider, and his wife Frances. Dr. Bergman suffered a stroke 10 days after a beating, repeated stomping of his head, and lived his life in a wheelchair. There, and then it was in Grand Rapids, he had some rehabilitation. And there at the Grand Valley Nursing Center on Kalamazoo Avenue, a 15-year-old high school girl working as a nurse's aide was assigned to help Dr. Bergman with his meals, as he could not eat independently. Daily conversation and reading his books changed her life. She is with us today. Sally Todd. Sally Todd, you say. Where's Sally? Oh, there she is. Brutally beaten, demoralized, the Freedom Riders gave up and left for New Orleans. Students at Fisk University decided otherwise and said, we're resuming the rides tonight. Diane Nash announced, we've made out our wills, and 10 of them boarded a bus for Birmingham. When they got to the bus terminal, they met this man. Confronted by this man and hundreds of his followers, Robert Sheldon, the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. He and his followers throughout the night terrorized the Freedom Riders, and the next morning, under pressure from the White House, Governor Patterson mobilized the Highway Patrol to protect the bus carrying the riders to Montgomery. Afraid of an ambush, the cars raced 90 miles an hour with 16 Highway Patrol cars with sirens screaming, helicopter with loud sounding noise overhead to Montgomery. When they arrived at the city limits of Montgomery, there were no police. They were beaten by over 100 Klansmen. And then the mob moved further to the street and it grew to over 3,000 people, attacking blacks, attacking reporters, and they set a black boy on fire. Jim's work was beaten to bloody unconsciousness, suffering fractured ribs and his teeth all knocked out. That night, he was taken to a local hospital, and that night the mob tried to get in the hospital to kill him. A nurse later told Jim, I drugged you that first night, so in case they got a hold of you, you wouldn't be aware of it. The following night, Dr. King flew to Montgomery and held a rally where 1,500 people packed First Baptist Church. By nightfall, a mob of more than 3,000 surrounded the church, threatened to burn it down, screaming, burn them, burn them, burn them. And while people on the outside were flipping over cars and setting them on fire, Dr. King, the people inside were singing hymns and gospel songs, freedom songs. And then Dr. King, afraid for their lives, called Robert Kennedy for protection. And then under pressure from the White House, Governor Patterson mobilized the National Guard, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, those inside were rescued and driven home in the back of the National Guard trucks. I was a 24-year-old young minister living and ministering in Chicago's segregated South Side. When I saw the bus burning and the bloody attacks on television, the words in Isaiah 1:17 spoke to my heart. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. I flew to Dr. King's office in Atlanta, and with 6 others became a Freedom Rider. Before getting on the bus, my necktie was partially cut behind my neck, so in case someone tried to choke me, it would come off easily. Shortly after leaving Montgomery, fellow Freedom Rider Ralph Furtick urged a white woman to let a black woman sit down. She was blocking the vacant seat by holding her leg across it. Complete pandemonium broke out. The most aggressive rage was directed to the 2 of us, who were white males. White males were seen as traitors to our race. 2 hours later, when we arrived in Selma, Ralph was drugged off the bus by the county sheriff. And the remaining 5 hours to Jackson, Mississippi was through the epicenter of segregation and lynching was excruciating, not knowing if I'd get back alive. We later learned that Ralph was arrested and placed in a bullpen with 5 men inmates that stomped him, fractured his ribs, and he was later flown to Chicago to Michael Reese Hospital. I was determined to get into the so-called colored waiting room in Jackson, Mississippi, no matter what. And when I did, I was arrested, put in a paddy wagon, taken to city jail, interrogated for hours, and placed in solitary confinement. When I appeared in court with my black attorney, one of only 4 black attorneys in the entire state at that time, I was not given an opportunity to speak a word. Remember, 1 year earlier, the Supreme Court had ruled that segregation by race in any public transportation or public facility was unconstitutional. I was found guilty of breaking a local ordinance and breach of peace and fined $200. 5 months after the first strike, the Interstate Commerce Commission ruled that segregation in public facilities and in transportation was banned, and all white only and all colored only signs were taken down. We won. The 328 Freedom Riders came from all kinds of backgrounds, economic, political, religious. We crisscrossed the South in 60 buses, Greyhound Trailway buses with regular passengers. Half of us are white, half black, and 2/3 were men, 2/3 were under 30. I was the 57th Freedom Rider out of 327 that was arrested in Jackson, and I was on the 7th of 60 buses. Trouble was waiting for me back in Chicago when I went home. With threats made on my life, Chicago police met me at the airport and set up around-the-clock protection. And the most horrific experience I've had was to receive a phone call from my pastor, who had said I was disfellowshipped from the church for being a communist, for being a Freedom Rider. Because at that time, Dr. King, there were bulletin boards of Dr. King being a communist. My passion for justice and mercy wasn't just a one-time fluke being a Freedom Rider. It was with me from the time I was a boy until now. Growing up was hard. Life at home had its pain, and I was bullied at school. Life changed for me when a youth leader in a small, fundamentalist country church sat me down and said, "Look up. God loves you. He has a plan for your life." And I told God then, I could see in his eyes and hear in his voice that he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I promised God if he made me strong enough, I would serve him the rest of my life. During my ministerial studies at Moody Bible in Chicago, it became clear my calling was to live and serve in the segregated part of Chicago's South Side, where African Americans were relegated to live since the 1930s. Blacks in Chicago and throughout the country found themselves trapped. In the 50s and 60s, the power structure responded to overcrowding by building concrete high-rise buildings in only our segregated, overcrowded, underserved parts of the South Side. Robert Taylor Homes was one of them. Chicago's Robert Taylor Homes had 28 16-story tall buildings. It was the largest public housing project in the country. And mind-boggling, but true, the development housing more than 27,000 residents was built without adding school classrooms. It was built without a supermarket. It was built without a drugstore. It was built without a community center for the young people. And lack of tenant screening brought transient drug dealers. There were no police programs to reduce crime. It suffered from chronic underfunding, overcrowding, and disrepair. It was a colossal failure, and it was torn down in 2007. The government's welfare program, No Man in the Home policy, was enforced at the time. It required social workers to make unannounced visits. And if they found men's clothing, cases were closed. Welfare was discontinued. The government policy devastated many black families. With chain link fence enclosing the balconies floor to ceiling, the Robert Taylor Homes came to be seen by many as prisons for the poor. Thousands of teenagers were uprooted from all over the city and thrown together. Hopelessness, despair, blurted out from homes, schools, and the street. And I sensed behind the teenagers' facades of being the baddest and the good, coolest, they were frightened young people, striking out at others and themselves for respect to be somebody, to live a good life. I understood hopelessness and despair from my childhood. I was living in the neighborhood at the time. The new projects were open, and returning one evening from downtown, I heard steps behind, and before I knew it, I was jumped by a group and beaten. The mission board decided to close the doors of the mission, and with no money, no place to stay, I lived on the street for the first winter, and at night slept in an all-night rib shack. I identified two of my attackers in a police lineup, and I asked the judge to release them to me, and I would organize a youth group for them, and the judge released them with the condition that they participate in my program. But when I got outside the courthouse, I discovered they already were in the group. They were the Cobras. Speaking up for them in court earned me street cred, acceptance and respect. And hanging them hanging out with them 7 days a week, I became part of their lives, and they part of mine. With their input, I set up a 7-day-a-week off-the-street program in the local YMCA, and we had worship on Sundays. The YMCA waived all membership cost. Ours was the only youth ministry in the entire project for the 20 years I was there. During the 1962 Billy Graham Crusade, I got leaders of the 18 gangs to declare a truce and to meet with Dr. Graham. After talking with the teenagers at the center, he invited them to attend his crusade that evening in McCormick Place and promised them front row seats and transportation. I got to work with the other leaders, and that night, That night, 450 of our gang-related teens attended the crusade, and 200 of them responded when he responded to his call when he gave the opportunity to come and receive Christ. The fourth summer of my ministry in the project was extremely violent. My 12th teenage funeral in 1 month was nearly unbearable. I rounded up the younger mothers and younger brothers and sisters and mothers of the gang-related teens. And it was the beginning of the Southside Christian Center family, a 7-day-a-week, tough love program to have them have fun and learn God's plan for their life. I signed a 3-year, $150 a month lease on a small storefront across from the project for the program. And to keep the door open, the mothers and the youth sold chicken dinners every Saturday, and I slept in the back storeroom. We outgrew the storefront, and after acquiring and renovating a 12,000 square foot building, commercial building, we had a chapel, classrooms for tutoring, regulation gym, basketball court, and a skating rink, in a room where I slept. Everybody loved roller skating. In renowned gospel singer and Mahalia Jackson biography, Just Mahalia Baby, she spoke of our friendship and our support and her support for my ministry. I quote from page 185. He was nothing but a child standing at her door at first time. Come on in, Reverend. He was small, but she noticed he walked like a little boxer. This Richard L. Gleason, this pale, tense boy from Ohio. Oh, she knew he had gone unknown into the worst of the South Side, got beat on, got those very boys that beat him out of jail, beat on him again, gone to jail himself, come out and headed back for the South Side. She listened while he said in his calm way how he was going to make a Southside Christian Center mission if it killed him. And it might, Mahalia thought. Gleason, why don't you go home to your mother? He wouldn't go. And when she saw into his heart, she knew he was real and said she would help. I'll give you a program. Raise you some money. Reverend Robert Russell, the prominent Atlantic City minister, intent on helping the big event Mahalia was staging, brought his friend, ex-champ Joe Walcott, as a favor to Mahalia. And she liked the way he was throwing himself in the program for the boys, for Gleason, poor Gleason.
It was her idea of organizing a youth choir for our younger brothers and sisters of gang-related teens. She was instrumental in Ralph Jones, her musician, leading the group. The choir recorded 2 LP records, toured coast to coast in 3 red Volkswagen buses, singing in churches and appearing on television. And the choir sang in our Sunday worship services each Sunday. They were broadcast on WVON, Chicago's largest black radio station. Weekly one-on-one tutoring by Wheaton College students enabled 40% of our choir members to earn college degrees. While in tour in Dallas, we met Dr. King. In 1968, upon the assassination of Dr. King, our community was a powder keg, and we acquired a 260-acre farm near Buchanan, Michigan. We named it New Hope. It came with 3 beautiful homes where we housed kids during the weekends and during the summer camping. The farm had 260 acres of 80 acres of apple orchard, producing nearly 20,000 bushel a season. Riding the speedboat on our 10-acre private lake, horseback riding and snowmobiling were highlights of their time at New Hope. In an enclosed area, we had fallow deer, pair of black swan, and our mascot, a baby buffalo. Mahalia Jackson, Queen of Gospel, who performed before kings and queens and presidents, was that and much more. To me, she was Haley, an endearing term used by those close to her, a dear friend. Like a mother hen who gathers her chicks under her wings, Haley took me under hers. I will ever be grateful for her moral and financial support through benefit concerts. Our 14-year friendship continued until her death in 1972 at the age of 60. Her music still brings back many precious memories. Our licensed specialized group home individualized needs of troubled youth unable to adjust to foster homes. My foster son David, not his real name, having been abused and neglected, responded to stress by starting fires. He was placed in our home when he was 13 after playing with fire in multiple foster homes. This is part of a text I recently received from David. Many times I have thought about that life with you in Chicago and Michigan. I was happy. I remember the exciting life that you provided for me and my foster brothers. The skating, the farm, and the riding horses, water skiing, and picking fruit. The one piece missing was, I didn't know my mother, or even if I had siblings. I would hear the other foster brothers talking about their mothers and their families, and I was left wondering what it would be like to have a mother. My experience with you allowed me to see I didn't have to give up on life and settle with my past. I could move forward. I didn't know that I was capable of learning anything until you worked with me in memorizing multiplication tables. Before that, I was just in school, just to be there. Rev, I made sure to pass all you taught me on to my son, who grew up knowing nothing can stop him from reaching his goals. David was bright, but he didn't know it until he started learning his multiplication tables. It ignited a spark of hope, self-confidence, self-discovery, and thirst for learning. It led to his having a fulfilling life and retirement from Microsoft. Today, David and his wife live in a vibrant beachside neighborhood in Venice, California. Black and brown, troubled youth are precious too. In 1963, my most cherished memory was being at the March on Washington and standing on the top steps of the Lincoln Memorial, witnessing Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. March 1965, Dr. King led a 54-mile march from Selma to Montgomery for voting rights. I'm walking behind Dr. and Mrs. King. When we arrived at the Capitol, the Confederate flag was flying, not the American flag. 5 months later, it led to the signing of the voting rights bill that's being taken apart by Supreme Court now this week. May 24th, 1964, I attended the Malcolm X and Lomax debate on separation of the races in Chicago Opera House. Malcolm told the surprised audience of 1,500 that he now rejected separation of the two races as a goal for the blacks because of a spiritual rebirth. He said that the change in his thinking came just days earlier during his Hajj pilgrimage in Mecca, when he looked up from the prayer rug and saw blue eyes. I met Malcolm after the program. 9 months later, Malcolm was shot to death. I attended his funeral in Harlem. 22,000 people viewed his body. May 2011, wow, Oprah, she's something else. She flew 178 of us to Chicago to tape her Freedom Ride 50th anniversary show. She put us up in luxury hotels, and it was an unbelievable experience. And I was one of the writers on the stage with Oprah. And then that same year, we had a reunion of our Southside Christian Center family. 40% of the choir had college degrees. 18 showed up 50 years later out of the 33 kids we had. And 2 master's degrees, 1 doctorate degree, and 2 full-time Christian ministry. Recently I did, in April I guess it was, I did a program in Granville High School, an assembly there. And here's the part where I was answering questions for the students. August 1966, Dr. King was leading a fair housing march in Chicago, and more than 2,000 screaming whites gathered and threw cherry bombs and bricks and bottles, and Dr. King was struck in the head and fell to one knee. Firecrackers sounded like bullets, a gunshot. It was terrifying. And more than 60 persons were injured and 30 cars were damaged. Yes, 20 months later, April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated. And I attended a private funeral in Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. And following the service, I walked with mourners behind the mule-drawn casket taken him to Morehouse College for public service.